It was a warm summer evening when Chris, Megan, and Evan set off on a spontaneous road trip. The three friends had always enjoyed taking random adventures, and this time, they decided to drive through the mountains to reach a small lakeside town known for its breathtaking views. The drive started smoothly, winding through picturesque valleys and forest-lined roads. With the sun setting behind the peaks, everything seemed perfect, until they encountered the hitchhiker. "Hey, there's someone up ahead," Megan said, pointing to a figure standing on the side of the road, thumb outstretched. The figure was an older man, wearing a faded jacket and a weathered baseball cap. He stood beside a rusted signpost that had clearly seen better days. The road was otherwise empty, and the nearest town wasn't for miles. "Should we pick him up?" Evan asked from the passenger seat, his brow furrowed. Chris, who was driving, shrugged. "It's late and he looks harmless. Maybe he just needs a lift into town." Reluctantly, Megan agreed, and they slowed the car to a stop beside the man. He smiled, though there was something off about his grin, something that made Megan uneasy. "Thanks for stopping," the man said in a gravelly voice. "I need to get to the next town. My car broke down a ways back." Chris nodded and motioned for him to get in. The man slid into the back seat, his worn hands clutching a small duffel bag. He didn't say much as they pulled back onto the road, but Megan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. After a few miles of awkward silence, the hitchhiker spoke again. "Strange things happen on this road," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Chris glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean?" The hitchhiker chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "People disappear. Cars vanish. One minute you're driving, the next, well, let's just say you should be careful." Megan exchanged a nervous look with Evan, her heart racing. "What are you talking about?" The hitchhiker's eyes met hers in the mirror, cold and empty. "You'll see soon enough." The hitchhiker's words left an unsettling tension in the car. Megan shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing back at him every now and then. He stared out the window, his face expressionless, as the road stretched on ahead. "Where exactly do you need to go?" Chris asked, trying to sound casual, but the nervousness in his voice was clear. "Just up ahead," the man replied cryptically, his eyes never leaving the darkening landscape outside. But as they drove, something strange happened. The road, which had been winding through the mountains, seemed to loop endlessly. They passed the same landmarks, a fallen tree, a crumbling stone wall, over and over again. "This can't be right," Evan said, sitting up straighter. "We've passed that wall 3 times now." Chris checked the GPS on his phone, but it showed them in the middle of nowhere, the little dot representing their car spinning in circles. "What the hell?" he muttered, trying to reset it. But the screen froze. Megan's heart pounded. "Maybe we should turn around." The hitchhiker chuckled again, that same hollow sound. "Told you, strange things happen on this road." "That's enough," Chris said, pulling the car over to the side of the road. "We're letting you out here." But when Chris turned around to face the hitchhiker, the back seat was empty. "He's gone!" Megan gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Evan whipped around, searching the back seat. "How did he? We didn't even stop." Panic flooded the car as they scrambled to make sense of what just happened. There was no way the man could have disappeared without them noticing, yet the back seat was vacant. The door still locked from the inside. "Let's get out of here," Chris said, starting the car again, his hands shaking on the wheel. But no matter how fast they drove, the road kept looping, the same landmarks appearing again and again. It was as though they were trapped, unable to escape. As they sped down the seemingly endless road, the sun had long since set, plunging them into total darkness. The only light came from the car's headlights, which cut through the thickening fog that now blanketed the road. "I don't understand," Chris muttered, his eyes darting between the road and the GPS, which remained frozen. "We should have reached town by now." Evan was glued to the window, watching the fog swirl around them like something alive. "Do you think we're—" He hesitated, swallowing hard. "Do you think we're stuck in some kind of loop?" Megan's pulse quickened. "It feels like we're going in circles, like that hitchhiker said." Just then, the fog ahead thickened, and from the mist emerged a dark figure standing in the middle of the road. Chris slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the car skidded to a stop mere feet from the figure. It was the hitchhiker. He stood there, his hands hanging loosely by his sides, his head tilted slightly to the left. His face was still shadowed by the fog, but his eyes gleamed in the darkness, fixed on them. "How did he get here?" Megan whispered, her voice trembling. "That's impossible," Evan added, his hand gripping the door handle. The hitchhiker didn't move, didn't say a word. He just stood there, staring at them. The fog swirled around him, distorting his figure, making him seem taller, more menacing. "We need to go," Chris said, his voice shaky. But as soon as he tried to start the car, the engine sputtered and died. The headlights flickered and went out, leaving them in total darkness. "No, no, no," Chris shouted, frantically turning the key, but the car refused to start. The hitchhiker began to move, slowly at first, then faster, his steps eerily silent as he approached the car. Megan's heart pounded as the hitchhiker drew closer, his figure now looming just beyond the fog. "What does he want?" she whispered, clutching her seatbelt tightly. "Why won't the car start?" Evan yelled, his voice filled with panic. Chris was still frantically trying to get the engine to turn over when they heard it. A tap. It was soft at first, barely noticeable, but it sent a shiver down Megan's spine. Tap, tap, tap. They turned slowly to see the hitchhiker's hand pressed against the window, his face now inches from the glass. His eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to draw them in, and his mouth was twisted into a cruel, knowing smile. "Get out!" His voice rasped through the glass, though his lips barely moved. "You can't leave until you finish the journey." "What journey?" Megan asked, her voice barely audible. The hitchhiker's smile widened. "The road never ends for those who try to escape. You must finish what you started." Chris's hands trembled as he tried the ignition one last time, and miraculously, the engine roared to life. Without thinking, he floored the gas, sending the car speeding forward. The hitchhiker vanished into the fog as they raced down the road, the tires squealing against the asphalt. But no matter how fast they went, the road stretched on endlessly, with no sign of the town or any other landmarks. "We're trapped," Megan whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We're never getting out of here." Hours passed, or maybe it was days. They couldn't tell anymore. Time seemed to lose meaning as they continued down the unending road. Megan had stopped checking the clock, and even Evan had given up trying to make sense of the GPS. Then, out of nowhere, they saw it again, the rusted signpost where they'd picked up the hitchhiker. Chris slowed the car, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. "We're back where we started," he said, his voice hollow. As they neared the spot, Megan's eyes widened in horror. Standing by the sign was the hitchhiker, just as they'd found him before, his thumb outstretched, his face hidden by the shadow of his cap. "This can't be happening," Evan whispered, his voice barely a breath. But the hitchhiker didn't move. He simply stood there, waiting. Megan felt a cold chill run down her spine as they passed him, but she forced herself to look away, not wanting to meet his gaze. They drove in silence for what felt like hours, but the hitchhiker was always there, standing at the side of the road, his thumb out, as though he was waiting for them to stop again. Exhausted and terrified, they eventually pulled over at a small clearing by the road. The hitchhiker hadn't appeared for a while, but the oppressive feeling of being watched never left them. "We can't keep going," Megan said, her voice shaky. "We're never going to get out of here." Evan rubbed his face with both hands, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Maybe he was right. Maybe we have to finish the journey. Chris stared out at the dark road ahead. But what journey? What does he want from us? Before they could come up with a plan, they heard it again. The soft tapping coming from the roof of the car this time. Megan froze, her heart racing. No, not again. Chris grabbed the flashlight and slowly opened the door, stepping out into the cold night air. As he shined the light on the roof, he saw the hitchhiker, crouched there, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "Finish the journey," the hitchhiker said, his voice echoing eerily in the night, "or you'll be stuck here forever." Chris backed away slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you want from us?" But the hitchhiker only smiled, his twisted grin growing wider. "Finish the journey, and maybe you'll find out." They never did figure out what he meant. Days turned into weeks, and they remained trapped on that road, driving endlessly, always seeing the same hitchhiker by the side of the road. And they never stopped again. It had been a long drive across the desert, and Aaron, Jess, and Mike were exhausted. They'd been on the road for nearly 10 hours, and the next town wasn't for another 2. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the vast desert in shadows, they were just about ready to pull over and rest. Look, up ahead. Jess pointed out the window as they passed a rusted sign barely visible in the twilight. It read, "Gas and Snacks," with an arrow pointing down a narrow dirt road. Aaron squinted through the windshield. "Do you think it's still open?" "It doesn't hurt to check," Mike replied. "We're almost on empty anyway." Reluctantly, Aaron turned down the dirt road. As they drove deeper into the desert, the faint glow of a gas station appeared in the distance, its flickering neon sign buzzing in the stillness. But as they pulled up, it became clear that the station was abandoned. The windows were boarded up, the pumps rusted and covered in dust. The neon sign continued to flicker, though no one had been here in years. "Looks like no one's home," Aaron said, turning to Mike. "But we're really low on gas. Should we risk it?" Mike nodded, though Jess seemed hesitant. "This place gives me the creeps," she muttered, glancing around at the empty desert. They decided to check inside the small convenience store for any signs of life. The door creaked open, and a musty smell greeted them as they stepped inside. "Hello?" Aaron called, but there was no answer. Inside, the shelves were bare, with only a few scattered items left behind. Old magazines, expired candy bars, and dusty bottles of water filled the racks. It was clear that no one had been here in a long time. "I don't think we're going to find gas here," Jess said, her voice uneasy. Mike walked over to the counter, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. "It's weird, though. The lights are still on. How is there power if this place is abandoned?" Before anyone could answer, the door swung open, and a man stumbled inside. He was disheveled, his clothes torn and dirty, and his face pale with fear. "You have to leave," he gasped, his eyes wide. "You can't stay here." Aaron stepped forward, concerned. "What's going on? Are you okay?" The man shook his head, looking over his shoulder as if expecting someone, or something, to follow him inside. "They'll come for you too, just like they came for me." "Who will?" Jess asked, her heart racing, but the man didn't answer. He turned and bolted back out the door, disappearing into the desert night. They stood there in stunned silence, trying to make sense of what had just happened. "We should go," Jess said finally, her voice trembling. "I don't like this place." But before they could leave, the lights in the gas station flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Panic set in as the darkness closed in around them. Aaron fumbled for his phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the room. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice steady, but tense. Panic set in as the darkness closed in around them. Aaron fumbled for his phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the room. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice steady, but tense. Jess and Mike nodded in agreement, but as they made their way to the door, it slammed shut on its own. "Did you see that?" Jess gasped, her eyes wide with fear. Mike ran to the door and pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if something, or someone, was holding it shut. "We're trapped," Mike said, his voice filled with dread. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, growing louder and more intense. It seemed to be coming from beneath the floor. The three friends exchanged panicked glances as the sound grew louder, rattling the walls. "What the hell is that?" Aaron shouted over the noise. Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath their feet began to shake, and the shelves toppled over, sending debris flying across the room. Then, without warning, the shaking stopped and the room fell silent. The only sound was their heavy breathing as they tried to process what had just happened. "We have to get out of here," Jess whispered, her voice barely audible. But as they turned toward the back of the store, they saw it. An old trap door, partially hidden beneath a fallen shelf. Against their better judgment, they approached the trap door, curiosity mingling with fear. "Do you think that's where the noise came from?" Mike asked, his voice shaky. Aaron knelt down and brushed away the dust, revealing an old padlock securing the trapdoor shut. "Maybe," he said, glancing at the others. "But do we really want to find out?" Jess shook her head. Let's just get out of here." But before they could turn back, the trapdoor creaked open on its own, the lock hanging loosely from the latch as if it had never been fastened. A chill ran down Aaron's spine as he peered into the darkness below. A narrow set of stairs led down into a dimly lit basement, the faint glow of a single light bulb barely illuminating the space. "Should we go down?" Mike asked, though the fear in his voice made it clear he didn't want to. Aaron hesitated but nodded. "We need to find out what's going on here." One by one, they descended the creaking stairs, the cold air growing thicker the deeper they went. As they reached the bottom, The smell of damp earth and decay filled their nostrils. The basement was small, with dirt walls and a single wooden table in the center of the room. On the table lay a collection of old maps, photographs, and a tattered journal. Jess picked up one of the photos and gasped. It showed a group of people standing outside the gas station, their faces blurry and distorted, as if something had twisted them beyond recognition. "What is this place?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, they heard it. The hum, louder now, more insistent, and coming from a small, rusted door at the far end of the room. Aaron moved toward the door, his heart pounding in his chest. "We have to see what's behind it," he said, though every fiber of his being screamed at him to run. The door was rusted and heavy, but with a little effort it creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway that led deeper into the earth. The hum grew louder as they stepped inside, the sound vibrating through their bones. The passage was lined with strange symbols etched into the dirt walls, glowing faintly in the darkness. "What is this?" Mike asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jess shook her head, too terrified to speak. As they reached the end of the passage, they entered a small chamber. In the center of the room was an old stone altar, covered in strange markings and dried blood. Surrounding the altar were several figures, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods, chanting in a low, guttural language. Aaron's breath caught in his throat. "We need to get out of here," he whispered, his voice shaking. But before they could turn back, the chanting stopped, and the figures slowly turned toward them. The hooded figures advanced slowly, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Aaron, Jess, and Mike backed away, their hearts racing as they realized there was no escape. But just as the first figure reached out to grab them, the ground began to shake again, this time more violently than before. The walls of the chamber cracked and crumbled, and the ceiling began to collapse. "We need to move," Aaron shouted, grabbing Jess's hand and pulling her toward the passageway. Mike followed close behind as they raced through the collapsing tunnels, the walls closing in on them. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, but they pushed forward, their only focus on escaping the underground nightmare. They burst out of the gas station gasping for air, their clothes covered in dust and dirt. Behind them, the gas station crumbled, collapsing into a cloud of debris. They didn't stop to look back. They jumped into the car and sped away, not stopping until they were miles down the road. As they looked back, all they saw was the dark desert night. The gas station, now nothing more than a distant memory, and they never spoke of it again. It was supposed to be a fun and carefree road trip along Route 66, a classic American adventure for college friends Laura, Tom, and Sarah. The idea was to soak in the nostalgia of the legendary highway, from its quirky attractions to its stunning desert vistas. But as their car roared through the twilight of the Illinois plains, things started to take an unsettling turn. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road, when Laura spotted a detour sign that none of them had seen before. The sign was old and rusted, with faded letters that barely read, "Scenic Route, Old Ghost Town." "Hey, should we check this out?" Laura asked, her curiosity piqued. Tom glanced at the road map. "We're a bit ahead of schedule, it might be interesting." Sarah hesitated, looking out the window at the darkening sky. "It does look a bit creepy. Are you sure?" Laura was already turning off the main road, and Tom shrugged, following her lead. They drove down the narrow, winding path that led deeper into the forest, the dense trees forming an ominous canopy overhead. After a few miles of bumping along a rough dirt road, they finally reached the ghost town. It was a small, decrepit place with crumbling buildings and overgrown weeds. The once proud saloon had collapsed into a heap of rotting wood, and the general store was barely standing, its windows shattered. "This place is pretty eerie," Tom said, trying to hide his unease. Sarah nodded. "Yeah, it feels like something out of a horror movie." Laura, ever the adventurer, was already out of the car and heading towards the old town square. "Come on, let's explore a bit. It'll be fun." The trio wandered through the desolate streets, their footsteps echoing eerily. The wind howled through the empty buildings, adding an unsettling sound to the oppressive silence. In the middle of the square stood an old clock tower, its hands frozen at midnight. Next to it was a weathered sign that read, "Welcome to Haverhill, population 13. "Population 13? Tom repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's a bit ominous." Laura shrugged. It's probably just a relic from the old days. As they continued their exploration, they noticed something odd. There were remnants of old campfires and strange markings on the walls of some buildings. The atmosphere grew heavier and a cold chill seemed to follow them wherever they went. After about an hour of exploring, the sun had completely set, and the darkness made the ghost town seem even more menacing. The trio decided it was time to head back to the car, but when they arrived at the parking spot, they were met with a horrifying sight. The car was gone. "What the hell? Where's our car?" Laura exclaimed, panic creeping into her voice. Tom frantically searched the area. "It was right here." "I swear it was." Sarah was visibly shaking. "We need to find a phone or something. We can't stay here." They decided to look for help in the ghost town, hoping to find someone who could assist them. They knocked on doors and called out, but there was no response. It was as if they were alone in the entire world. Suddenly, they heard the sound of a car engine in the distance. They raced towards the noise, hoping it was someone coming to their rescue. But when they reached the edge of town, the car sound abruptly stopped, and an oppressive silence fell over them. Desperation set in as they realized they were utterly alone. They decided to camp out for the night in one of the old buildings, hoping to wait until morning when they could figure out their next move. As they settled down, Laura found an old journal in one of the rooms. It was filled with scrawled entries about the town's decline and strange occurrences. One entry stood out. "Beware the midnight visitors. They come when the clock strikes 12. They take what is theirs and leave nothing but shadows." Laura showed the journal to Tom and Sarah, who both looked troubled. The mention of midnight visitors made their blood run cold. As the clock tower struck midnight, a chilling breeze swept through the building. The temperature dropped significantly and the darkness outside seemed to deepen. Shadows danced on the walls and strange, whispering voices filled the air. The three friends huddled together, their fear palpable. They could hear footsteps approaching, but whenever they looked, no one was there. The whispers grew louder, almost forming coherent words, though they couldn't make them out. In the middle of the night, a strange, ghostly figure appeared in the town square. It was a translucent man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, his eyes hollow and glowing faintly. He seemed to be searching for something, his expression a mix of sadness and anger. Laura, Tom, and Sarah watched from their hiding place, their hearts pounding. The figure moved through the ghost town, passing by the old buildings and the clock tower. It was clear he was looking for something, or someone. Suddenly, the ghostly figure stopped in front of the old clock tower and looked directly at them, his hollow eyes locking onto theirs. A chilling sensation ran down their spines as the figure raised a hand and pointed towards the old saloon. Without warning, the figure vanished and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. The friends felt a compulsion to move towards the saloon, as if guided by an unseen force. They followed the pull, their fear mounting with every step. As they approached the saloon, they saw a strange pulsating light coming from inside. Inside the saloon, they found a hidden basement, illuminated by an eerie, otherworldly glow. The walls were lined with old photographs of the town's inhabitants, their faces frozen in terror. In the center of the room was a dusty old box. Tom opened the box, revealing an assortment of old trinkets and a single key. The moment he touched the key, the whispers stopped, and a sense of calm fell over them. "Maybe this is what we need," Laura said, holding up the key. They made their way back to the car's parking spot, where they found the key worked on an old, hidden trunk that had been left behind. Inside the trunk were supplies, including a map and a set of car keys. With renewed hope, they followed the map to a hidden area, where their car was parked, undamaged and ready to go. They couldn't believe their luck. As they drove away from the ghost town, the oppressive atmosphere lifted and the road stretched out before them once more. They glanced back at the fading silhouette of Haverhill, the ghost town now a distant memory. They never spoke of that night again, and they never took a detour on their road trips. But every now and then they'd hear a whisper in the wind, reminding them of the night they barely escaped the haunted ghost town of Route 66.